I am Trina Lawson, and I am very excited to have this event tonight because it means so much to us to vote and to exercise our right to vote. We are going to share with you tonight why your vote really matters, why this election is so serious that it's bigger than just voting for the president, that this is about your whole ballot. And so we wanted to be able to explain some of the social issues and some of the things that are going on, some of the measures, and we just want you to sit back, take some great notes. You can put questions into the chat. You can write some notes down because this is exciting, right? So again, thank you. Welcome, 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 especially to our guest speakers. I thank you for taking your time because it's always hard to do this on a work night. I don't care if you're working from home or working from wherever, it's hard to take the time out to make time to spread information to the public and to help us out. So we truly appreciate it. And Trina Lawson Group, just to tell you real quickly, what we do is we're connectors. I am a connector, connecting you to people like the other people on this call. So in gathering customers and clients, relationships matter. So in developing a business where our relationship well, connect people to resources, funding, and other people, that is my life. That was my dream. It's a fruition. It came to happen right now. And it's working because you guys are all getting connected. So again, thank you for supporting Trina Lawson Group. And I am going to go ahead and get us started with our moderator because he is the perfect moderator for today. This is Gregory C. Scott. We are going to be turning it over to him. And Mr. Scott is the perfect moderator for this type of event because he has worked with homeless organizations. He has worked as a CEO with veterans, with homeless organizations. He is now the CEO and president of Community Action Partnership of Orange County. That organization was established out of the war on poverty and all of our civil rights history. So this is an important organization dealing with poverty, and they do things from diaper banks to food banks to all kinds of social services that are offered to the public. So that takes a different kind of heart and a different kind of person. So Mr. Scott is currently the president and CEO of Community Action Partnership of Orange County, but I don't know, I can't say in his spare time, but in some time from somewhere, he also owns his own business, Scott Impact Group. He's a CEO and works as an executive coach. So he's a great friend of mine, has coached me, helped me to even get this business off the ground. He's a great coach and leader and trainer of leaders. So that's always so exciting. And he has so many accolades. I had to write some of them down. He has been honored with so many different awards and still now currently, and I know I probably got this number wrong, but serves on about 5 different boards of directors for different agencies. So just imagine with all of this other stuff, he's serving on these boards to further help the community. But he's been honored by Lifetime Achievement Awards, LA County Board of Supervisor Award, and recently featured in Sweet Life Southern California magazine. The biggest, most recent one that popped up and we all got to celebrate with, Gregory was selected as Modern Luxury Media most influential person in Orange County. And I was like, hey, that number is a 1 next to your name. Did you see that? Did you see that? So this is exciting. This is the type of leadership and the type of momentum that we want to see our families grow in and our groups grow in. But this is why, again, I'm saying he's the perfect moderator for tonight because he is a gentle giant with a great spirit, great friend and mentor, and all of this different expertise in social issues that impact us just makes us very excited, very honored to have you as our moderator. Help me to welcome Mr. Gregory C. Scott. Thank you.
Wow. It's always embarrassing when someone introduces you, especially if they introduce you like that. So thank you, Trina Lawson and the Trina Lawson Group for this opportunity. Certainly, you're doing some amazing work in terms of making an impact on the community. Connecting people to the right people is one thing to be connected, but when you connect people to the right people, magic happens. And so there's a lot of appreciation for all that you're doing. I'm humbled and honored to serve as the moderator for tonight, which I think is a very, very important topic and is timely for this season. And I'm almost, don't feel I deserve to even be moderating such a amazing panel who I've gotten to know, and just talking with them and hearing about all the things that they're doing. But let's put this in context. We know that we are dealing with what I call a triple threat. And so most people think that this pandemic that we're dealing with as relates to this public health issue of COVID-19 is the first pandemic that we've dealt with. But the racial reckoning and racial injustice has been a pandemic we've been dealing with for 4 centuries. And so that was the first pandemic that we've been dealing with. Then the public health issue of COVID-19 showed up, and you add that on top of a pandemic we're already dealing with. You add that on top of, and we have a problem. The result of both of those things has resulted in an economic downturn. So we're dealing with a triple threat: a racial reckoning, a public health issue around COVID-19. I've lost family members. I lost an aunt and an uncle within 10 days of each other because of COVID-19. And we're dealing with an economic downturn. So unemployment is at the highest rate. Homelessness continues to soar. Schools are out. A lot of people not sure where their next meal is coming from. Food insecurity, hunger, all those things that we've been dealing with have been heightened, all because of what I call a triple threat. So while we're here tonight, this is about your vote matters. Your whole ballot matters. Most people think that whenever we have a presidential election, that we just focus on the president, who's going to be our president. And this is not about who you're going to vote for or not vote for. We're not swaying you either way. But this is about educating you and looking at not just a presidency, but there are other things that are on the ballot that matter to you. And we're going to talk about some of those things a little bit tonight. But ultimately, we want to inspire you to do your own research and not just focus on the presidency, but look at the other things that are also on a ballot that affect you on a day-to-day basis, no matter who the president is. Some of these things affect you no matter who the president is. So your whole vote matters. Voter suppression is an issue. Voting is like air. Voting is like air. We all take it for granted until it goes a different way. And anytime when we take air for granted, we think we're gonna wake up and we're just gonna breathe until you don't have air, then it's an issue. Voting is similar to that, because if you don't vote, you take it for granted. You don't vote, you sit at home, or you don't do the things, or you don't educate yourself, you don't vote. And then when it goes the wrong way, it's 911 and we have an emergency. So voting is like air. Take notes. Think about why you're here. More than just the fact that Trina invited you or any of us invited you, think about why you're here. Be present. We're not going to be here long. The panelists have a lot to say. They have a lot in them. They have a lot to say, but we're not going to be here long. So be present. Take notes. Be smart. Think about which way your ballot is going to go. I'm going to start it off with this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I'm going to say it one more time. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. This vote matters. Your vote matters. So let me start by introducing our panelists. First person I'm going to introduce is Judge Patricia Titus. She's a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge. She's very passionate about things that are happening in the community. She's also an author of Friends for Life, 7 Keys to Supporting Loved Ones Experiencing Domestic Violence. And why is that important? Think about, domestic violence has gone up. It's been heightened because of COVID-19. And so we're going to hear from Judge Titus tonight. You're also going to hear from a good friend of mine. He's an attorney, Ludlow B. Crary. If you know anything about the Crary name, you know it has major legacy right here in Los Angeles. So he is a icon. His family's an icon. His dad's an icon. His family name is an icon here in Los Angeles, and he is out there beating the streets as an attorney. And then you're also going to hear from Mr. Kevin Anderson. He's also an attorney for the LA City Attorney's Office. He is a deputy city attorney, He's been with that office for over 20 years, and he participates in all phases of litigation. So all the people that are on this panel are on the street, born and raised right here in LA. They know what's happening on the street. They understand why this ballot is important. And so I'm going to start it off with Judge Titus, and just ask her as we start off this panel, just to kind of give a little bit of background about herself. But tell us why during this pandemic, why is domestic violence such an issue?
Thank you, Mr. Scott, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to educate yourself about the issues in the upcoming election. Just a little bit about myself. I've been on the bench for 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the people of the state of California decided that I was the right choice for justice and elected me to the Los Angeles Superior Court. I've spent the past 12 years in Inglewood handling domestic violence restraining orders, as well as the drug court. Before I was elected to the bench, I spent 15 years as a deputy DA, where I prosecuted family violence cases, baby homicides, and murders between dating partners, ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. So that is my backstory. I'm definitely born and raised in LA. I always like to say I grew up in the hood. It was the small H, not the big H, but it was the hood nonetheless. So when people come to court, they can't pull the wool over my eyes or give me the okey doke, because I know what they're talking about. Domestic violence is very important. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Did you know that? You probably knew that it was Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but October is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's signified by the purple ribbon or the purple color. COVID, with people being at home on top of each other, it has heightened tensions, and domestic violence has increased, as well as the intensity. I was at a judicial conference earlier last month in September and found out that domestic violence homicide is the second leading cause of death for Black women between the ages of 16 and 35. And that's an outrageous, alarming, obscene statistic, and something needs to be done about it. Even if you don't have domestic violence in your personal experience, I guarantee if you count 2 people to the right and 2 people to the left, somebody has been, or is getting ready to go into a domestic violence situation. And it's not limited to physical violence. It includes verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse, etc. There are like 7 major categories. And so my effort, since I have to remain neutral, my book was telling the friends and family how to be supportive, because everyone's journey is different. The question isn't, why did she stay? The question should be, why does he batter? And while the 2 of them are figuring that out, what I ask you to do is be supportive, because if and when the person being abused, and 85% of the people being abused are women, 15% are men, but overwhelmingly women, but still, when they're ready to extricate themselves from the relationship, they need support. And so I ask you not to get sick and tired of hearing them crying and going back, but just remain supportive so that when they are ready to take a next step, you're there to walk with them. Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Oh, powerful stuff. If you don't have a book, you need to get it. Is it on? I'm assuming it's on Amazon.
On Amazon and on my website, judgetitus.com.
Get the book, because we know during this time period, people are home, right? People are isolated, can't go out like we used to. And so if you were dealing with domestic violence beforehand, certainly not just domestic violence, but other issues like that have been heightened for sure. So we appreciate the work that you're doing in that arena, because that work is certainly important. Mr. Anderson, Mr. Kevin Anderson.
Hello.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, but also tell us, why do you think this vote is important for our community?
Well, my name is Kevin Anderson. I am a deputy city attorney. I've been doing that for over 20 years. I believe I did a trial in front of Judge Titus when I first started, a DUI trial some years ago. I also have prosecuted domestic violence for about 7 years. And so I echo her sentiments as it relates to domestic violence, a very important aspect of our lives. I've also done defense work for the city of Los Angeles regarding personal injury, and I've done criminal prosecution for over 15 years. But as it relates to the vote and why it matters, I once heard a minister say that I've learned more about the Bible from being a parent than I have from reading it. And I struggled with that initially. But when I began to have children, I have 2 children, aged 20 and 22, I now understand what that man was talking about. So when you talk about the importance of voting in this particular election, what's on the ballot? You've got police reform, you've got healthcare, you've got education, you've got student loans. All of these things are not only important to us all, but they're in my very home. I got 2 children, 20 and 22. Well, currently they're on my healthcare plan until 26. Well, if that Obamacare is eliminated, guess what? Then they're kicked off of my health insurance. Police reform, when they're stopped by the police, it's important that their lives is not prematurely taken out or those kind of things. And so when you look at the importance of voting, it affects young people. And let me say this before we move on, and you should have taken query for me with that iconic status, but let me say this before we move on. Never in my lifetime have I been part of something that has affected the whole world. And that's what this COVID thing has done. And as you mentioned, Mr. Scott, it has exposed other areas as well. I like to call it COVID 1619 because that was the beginning of slavery. That's what I like to call it. But because it has affected all of us, be it church, be it work, be it our children. My son goes to USC. Now they're having class online. He's a basketball player. Now they can't travel the country. It has impacted all of them. And so as a result, I call it 10 toes down, all hands on deck. We need to be involved on the local, on the state, and on the federal level because these things are affecting you. And I'll say this in closing. I was at a restaurant not long ago, and a young African-American female was taking my order. And I don't know how the topic of politics came up. And she said, "I don't do politics." I was disheartened by that, but I'm saying, well, politics does you. You may not do politics, but it does you. And for her to not be involved in decisions about her body, about her future, that was disheartening. And so it matters. And so that's why I'm here to lend any support that I can.
Awesome, awesome. Man, Mr. Anderson, you dropped it. Thank you for that. Mr. Creary, same question goes to you because I'm thinking, man, when I was 18, 19, growing up in the hood, voting just wasn't important to me. I didn't think my vote mattered. I was just one vote, one man. And so I never, it took me growing up and really understanding the process to really understand why my vote matters, why there's legacy in my vote. You being a man of legacy, Mr. Creary, talk to us a little bit about, who you get, a little bit about your background, but why should young people vote? I'm 18. I'm a young Black man. Why do I need to vote? Why is this important? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Am I there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir. We got you.
So I was born and raised in the LA area. I was born at St. Francis Hospital in Linwood. When I was a small child, when I was born, we lived in View Park, which is now known as the Black Beverly Hills. And we moved over to the West Side subsequent to that. So I really got to see life from a whole nother perspective, which was the perspective of being the only Black kid in the room, and got to really understand how people from that vantage point live and how they view us as a people. My parents and my grandparents never let me forget who I was and where I came from. And my father, being from a Black nation, being from Jamaica, he definitely was very self-possessed and very proud of who he was as a Black man. My mother, growing up in the Jim Crow South in Louisiana, got to see life from that vantage point. Yet she had very proud parents who made sure she went to Howard University and got an education. And she also instilled in me and my siblings a pride in who we are as Black people. So even though I was from 6 years old up to my late teens, being raised in a predominantly non-Black environment, I was always kept grounded by my parents and my grandparents. I moved on to UCLA, got my bachelor's degree there, worked in the financial industry for a few years, and then went to law school. So that's essentially where my journey began as a lawyer. My family has, my father was involved in building West Adams Community Hospital, which was the first hospital west of the Mississippi that was conceived, financed, built, and staffed by African Americans. My father, Dr. Crary, and 9 other Black physicians broke ground on West Adams Community Hospital in 1969, and the hospital opened its doors to the community in 1972. The building still stands today. It's on Western Avenue, right off the 10 freeway, and you can see this building, and it's in the historic Adams District. Right down the street is Golden State Mutual Life Insurance, which was the first African American insurance company, and they had their own building right there on Western and I believe Western and Adams. And right on the corner is First AME, the first organized church, if I'm not mistaken, in Los Angeles. So that's a historic area. So that's a part of my family legacy. And I'm a litigator. I do primarily civil litigation and criminal defense. I've been practicing for 23 years. I've handled some of the most serious felony cases, all the way to some of the most non-serious cases. And I, really try to live up to the legacy and serving my community in the work that I do. So, having said that, why is it important for young people to vote? Well, because that's how young people change. That's how we affect our community. That's how we get the things that we need for our community. If a politician doesn't see that you're voting, the politician thinks you don't care. The politician doesn't even know what you want or need, and the politician isn't going to focus on what you need. So then it becomes a situation where it feeds itself because you're not participating. They're not paying attention to you. They're not paying attention to you, so you're not participating. So nothing happens. And then years go on, you have neglect in the neighborhood. There's the schools are bad. There's public safety is bad. The environment is run over, and you have these elected officials, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's getting done. If you vote, and if we vote as a large group, we will see progress. We will see things happen. They will be accountable to us, but then we have to hold them accountable. But before we hold our elected officials accountable, we have to know what we want. We have to have an agenda. So our vote is important because that is the way you affect change. You have to vote, you have to participate. But beyond voting, you have to know what you want, and you have to vocalize what you want, and you have to create an agenda that you take to the elected officials, and you hold them accountable to that agenda. So I can understand why young people don't see that their vote matters, because they look around them and nothing changes from year to year, from election cycle to election cycle. But you have to engage if you want to see that change.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Judge, I'm coming back to you. I'm coming back to you. And I want to be careful how I ask this question. We know that there's a long history of voter suppression in this country. Could domestic violence be a form of voter suppression?
That's an interesting question. And it could perhaps, but I look at it in terms of this. The courts are available for people to get restraining orders when they're being abused at home. Many people might not be aware that you can get a kick-out order for someone that you're in 2 degrees of separation from. So either current or former boyfriend, current or former husband, brother, sister, parent, if they're all living together and they're there by invitation, but they're abusing you, you can get a move out order. It's instantaneous. People don't really know that. You don't have to stay abused. But the issue African Americans often have is the mistrust of the police. They want the abuse to stop. They want their loved one to get help, whether it's drug abuse or alcohol counseling. They don't want them shot dead. And now with the Jacob Blake case, you call someone to assist you, and then they get shot by the police. And they weren't even involved. They were just coming to render aid. So that's why my perspective has been for the loved ones to be supportive. So maybe if they had had some support for people who actually knew what to suggest, it wouldn't have gotten to a point where they're actively being beat and they have to call Jacob Blake to get shot by the police. But there are many types of abuse. So in a abusive relationship, they can hide the ballot. They can say, no, you can't vote. Or they can say, you can vote, but I'm filling out your ballot and signing your name. What you gonna do about it? So that could be voter suppression, of course.
Awesome. And that's exactly kind of where I wanted to go. And now, given Kevin, given what the judge just said, she talked about, a lack of trust for police officers. She talked about, being able to go to court and kind of trusting that whole system. Earlier, you mentioned police reform. If you had a magic wand and you can change how we do policing in the community, how would you do that?
Well, there's several things that can be done. Number one, I believe that police officers ought to live in the neighborhoods that they police. I just believe that. And then they would certainly identify with the individuals, the constituents, and they can be held accountable. Oftentimes, these officers come from faraway locations or jurisdictions, and they come into police in areas that they're not very familiar with, and they don't understand what's going on. Number two, I've recently, and Trina Lawson and I talked about seeing this video, there was an ex-policeman that said that because there is no one speaking up for the individuals that we police, we don't have to worry about blowback. And I thought that was very important because they said, if the community or individuals are not calling the elected officials and complaining about certain behavior and talked about the disparity and traffic stops or crimes or whatever the case is, that there's nobody holding the elected officials responsible, then that doesn't get back to the police department and they continue to do what they're doing. And Ludlow makes a very excellent point. If you don't show up, you just literally forfeited your vote. You forfeited your voice and you are allowing them to continue to do whatever they want to do. And so there has to be some advocacy. As a prosecutor, I've had cases where influential individuals would call on behalf of a particular defendant, and for some reason, they got a great deal. That's not happening with people of color. That just isn't. Certainly not on a large scale. And that becomes important because when we talk about local politicians, they have influence. They're giving to these campaigns, and they expect a tick for tack kind of a favor. And so, for me, to answer your question, one, they would have to come from the neighborhood that they're part of, and two, they'd have to be held accountable. And that's the voices of the community, that we would have some kind of oversight committee made up of individuals in the community that will not be governed and sold out by political contributions. That's where I would start.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great point. Great point. Mr. Crary, you just heard Mr. Kevin Anderson talk about police reform and his ideas around how he would do policing differently. So my question for you is, if I had a felony, I have paid my you know, I've given back to society. I've paid my dues. I'm now back home. I'm trying to get my life together. I have a felony. I'm a Black man. I have a felony. I'm coming back to the community. I paid my dues. Why should I have a right to vote?
Well, because you have paid your debt to society. That doesn't make you no longer a full U.S. citizen. You know, we have to get away from this idea that when, you know, people make mistakes and, you know, end up getting convicted of crimes, that somehow that, you know, that turns them into a leper and they can no longer be part of society. You know, that is how, you know, first off, that is how one of the ways that our community, the men coming from our communities, have been disenfranchised. So, you know, you are still a human being, you're still an American citizen, and you've paid your debt to society. So why shouldn't you have your right to vote fully restored, and your right to have your say in who gets elected to serve your community that you live in? Why should you lose that right permanently? You shouldn't. It doesn't make sense. And so absolutely, I have no problem with former felons and former incarcerated felons having their vote restored.
Love that. Mr. Crary, I'm gonna stay with you. I'm not gonna leave you. I'm not leaving you yet. I'm staying with you. Because I know one of the propositions that's on the ballot is about, I'm switching a little bit, is about affirmative action. And here we are in 2020, and we're still talking about affirmative action.
Yes.
Why do you think that is? And what can we do about it going forward?
Because we're still living in a society that is saturated in institutionalized racism.
Come on.
From the bottom to the top. And we have we are not representative. We are not represented in significant numbers in just about any of the professions, in banking. I mean, you name it. We are not represented in significant numbers. I think in my profession, you know, African Americans comprise, I believe, less than 3% of all lawyers in the United States. And doctors, I think it's about the same, about 3% or less, you know, for doctors. And I think the numbers are the same for accountants, you know, in the nursing field, our percentages are low. In law enforcement, definitely in the fire service. So, you know, just across the board, I just recently, the CEO of Wells Fargo, who unfortunately I've had my account with for the last 5 years, said he can't find any qualified African-American candidates for executive positions, high-level executive positions with Wells Fargo. Now that is such a cliche statement. That's so. The law firms say the same thing. And that's just hogwash. So what they do, in my opinion, is well, if you can reduce the numbers that are getting into universities, well, then now we have a real basis for saying we don't have any qualified candidates. And why should we have affirmative action? Because you have to level the playing field. And this was the basis for affirmative action from the start. The playing field was never leveled. But when we did have affirmative action, the African-American middle class grew at a historic rate while we had affirmative action. Then all of a sudden, oh, well, that's not fair. That's not fair to quote qualified students. But then we find out, well, how are they getting in? Money, influence, pulling strings, legacy. So where's the meritocracy that was being talked about? No, the meritocracy, the quote meritocracy only applies when it comes to us. We have to level the playing field, and the way to level the playing field is to reinstate affirmative action, pure and simple. You have to balance it.
Yeah, love that, love that. All right, Judge, I'm coming to you. I'm taking a risk. I'm coming to you, though. And I'm gonna go back to how we started. We talked about your whole ballot matters. And obviously there are different measures that are on the ballot, but also there are other local people who are running for office that are also on the ballot. Judges, all types of people who are on the ballot. Give us a little bit about why voting for the right judge matters, or voting for, and I hope I'm not, and for the audience, I'm totally off script. I totally went somewhere else, separate from what we all talked about. I was gonna give them questions on, but they flowing with me, and I appreciate the panelists flowing with me. But for the audience sake, I totally went somewhere else. But if you can, Judge, tell us why we have to be educated about these other, beyond the presidency, why these other people who are running for office, why making that right choice matters too.
Well, you might not know this, Mr. Scott, but I'm a Toastmaster, and I see several of my Toastmasters on this Zoom call with me, and thank you for joining me. But I actually did a speech once on people running for office. What you have to understand is that when someone is elected, they can often start a family dynasty of politicians. Consequently, it's very important for you to know who's running at every level. If you look at the pedigree of many of the people, long-standing politicians, some of them started on the community college board. Guess what? There are 5 or 7 community college positions on this ballot. They started city councilmen. Guess what? There are city council races on this ballot. So it's very important. And then you look and see how long have they been in politics. Some people ran 2 or 3 times before they got elected, but 20 years later, they are still in politics. So it's important when you're casting your vote, go to their websites and look them up. And if you don't want to take that time, ask credible others. For judges, there are almost always at least 2 or 3 judicial offices on the ballot. Often people will leave those blank because they don't know who to vote for. Well, you don't know any of the other politicians, so why can't you just vote for the judges? It's like you just vote for everybody else who you do not know personally. But if you know somebody that knows someone who's a lawyer or a judge, ask a credible other what their opinion is about all the candidates. ask their opinion. If you don't know about the propositions, find a credible other who you do know knows about the propositions and who will take the time to explain it to you so that you can cast an informed vote. But don't leave it blank, because there are too many people, too many things in our society that have ulterior motives to benefit themselves and not for the greater good. And you need to know that. And then if you don't have a credible other, but there are politicians that you know, for instance, Maxine Waters, she always puts out a mailer, or on her website, she'll list who she's endorsed. If you find her to be credible, other than without any other information, then you'll cast the vote the way she casts her vote. Many local newspapers make endorsements, but I don't know about anyone in the Black community who takes a local newspaper to the polls and votes by that. But what they do is take Maxine Waters' mailer. I don't know if anybody else in the Black community has a mailer, but she's had a long-standing mailer, and she endorsed me 20 years ago. She's very, very kind to do so. But it's critical because the judges stay on the bench forever. And if you have a loved one that goes into court, you want to kind of have an idea about, what at least what they say in their website, but ask people who might know them or know of their reputation, but ask people rather than just simply going by endorsements. But it's worth your time to find out, because, I've been on the bench for 20 years. I was elected, but people knew me in the community, and I ran in the Inglewood Judicial District, but now everyone's running countywide and you often won't know them. But every candidate has a campaign website. You go through their campaign website, see what they're talking about, Google their name, see what pops up, see who's endorsed them on their campaign, if they're a serious candidate or not, and then make an informed decision. Don't leave it blank, because they're going to get elected. Even if 3 people voted, the person that got 2 or got all 3 votes, they're going to be on the bench. And the terms are 6 years. And many of the other races are 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, just depending on what it is. But going back to my Toastmasters speech, your one vote for that low level can start a dynasty where they stay in office for 25 years, then their kid, their cousin, their uncle, their nephew, and it just goes on for decades. So your vote matters. And even at the community college or city council level, or if they switch offices, you see now, city councilman running for supervisor running for state senate. I mean, it just keeps it going. So your vote matters.
Awesome. Thank you, Judge. I'm glad I didn't cross the line. I didn't go too far and cross the line. But Mr. Anderson, I'm coming to you. When I look at your background, I can see where you are, as you did the introduction earlier. You serve as a deputy city attorney. You're dealing with a lot of different issues, from prostitution to drunk driving to, it's a lot, even domestic violence, a lot of different issues. But I also saw in your background that you have also done some advocacy around fair housing opportunities and fair housing. And we know that there's a proposition on the ballot in about 24 days, 25 days around rent control. Why is rent control important right now?
Well, you asked a very good question. First of all, let me say that we need to probably pay attention to some of these messages that are popping up. I've seen some that have been very good, but there's a book called Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And I read this book and it really knocked me off my feet. It had to do with restrictive racial covenants that Blacks couldn't get property in certain neighborhoods. They were forced to move into low-income areas, and it affected the property tax values for their schools. They were redlined. They couldn't get loans, couldn't get all of that stuff. And for me, reading that book and looking at some of the cities were Downey, that are not too far from where I live, in Westchester, and I'm seeing those kind of things that we have not been able to build generational wealth because we have been denied homeowner opportunities. But as you relate to rent, and you make a good point that we've got to do our own investigation. For me, if I were a renter, I would want my rent to be reasonable and proportionate to the money that I make, so that I would not be homeless the very next day because the property owner wants to raise my rent or to double and triple my rent. And so me personally, I agree with rent control. I do. I think property owners should make a fair share. But then on the other side of that equation, you have individuals who are property owners and they want the right to be able to charge whatever it is. I think that there ought to be a balance into that. I think that there ought to be a fairness in that. And so for me, I support that proposition. And I don't know if we're going to go over the numbers. I think you mentioned the number on that one, but that's why I stand on that, because that's fairness for me. And when Judge Titus talked about, these judges, we as lawyers, before we even accept a judge, we have a right to what we call paper that judge, that we don't like that judge's proclivities. We don't like that judge's tendency. That judge might be pro-defense. That judge might be pro-prosecution. And so it's important for us to know that judge as well. And so for us, it's about educating ourselves, and these ballot measures. And I know we're concerned about Trump and that whole 9 yards and the disaster that I just heard about this town hall meeting. But for us, it's that other stuff that matters on a day-to-day basis for us. And we talked about affirmative action, that we were given, they were given a 400-year head start. We should have affirmative action to try to level the playing field. I agree with that as well. So as Judge has said, you do your own research and you land where you land. But for me, I believe in rent control. And I do have rental property as well.
Awesome. Man, I think we fired you up, Kevin. I love it. I love it. Mr. Curry, I'm coming to you. And I probably want to ask you a similar question, probably the same question around rent control. We know that homelessness is a major issue here in the city. We see it every single day. What's your perspective? You talked about, you earlier you talked about affirmative action. What's the connection between affirmative action, rent control, and redlining? Because Kevin, I don't know if you used that word, but really redlining, where certain people were just denied access. And so whether it's housing, whether it's jobs, whether it's rent control, whatever it is, what's your perspective on that? Because some of these measures, Kevin, I didn't go into naming the numbers and all of that, but my questions are all centered around those propositions. But Mr. Curry, tell us a little bit about your perspective around that issue.
Well, all of it is designed to address inequality. Obviously we talked about affirmative action and leveling the playing field. And just, I want to say one thing about that. One other thing about that is that, look, we're not talking about, making it easy for people of color to get into elite colleges without doing the necessary preparation to go there. That's not what we're talking about. So that is something that in the past has always been used as, oh, well, they're not qualified and they didn't deserve it. Absolutely qualified and deserving African-American and Latino, Latinx, and other students are being denied access, and affirmative action will address that. Now on to the connection between the three. I think, well, it all goes down to addressing inequality. Rent control will, as Kevin said, we're trying to combat homelessness. We're trying to combat a situation where people's incomes, people are working full-time jobs, their income cannot cover the cost of putting a roof over their head. And you have people living in campers who work, who have jobs. You have people living under the freeway who actually go to work. Yep. You have people living in their cars who actually work, who actually make an income. So there's something that is out of line here. And homelessness is overwhelmingly it overwhelmingly hits the Black population in LA. You know, so there's that connection there. And then, you know, I'm sorry, the last, and redlining. Well, that, you know, that's obvious. I mean, that's just pure, you know, containment. You know, containment in what we have. Back when I was young, they called it the ghetto. You know, that was by design. That was by design. You don't give home loans to people of color, so you can keep them from moving into certain neighborhoods, you know, and keep them contained where they are. And so all of it has the underpinning of what? Racism. And racism goes all the way back, as we all know, to, as Kevin alluded to, 1619, actually before 1619, but officially when the first slave ship, you know, landed in North America in 1619, that's when the racism that we know was born. So it all has the underpinning of racism, and we have to address that. As a society, we have to address that.
Yep, awesome. Man, I am running out of time. And I certainly want to get to some of the comments and questions that are popping up in the chat. But I do want to give our panelists, one, I want to thank them. We can do this all night. And because there's so much, it's so rich. And there's so much information there, and they are so rich with information and perspective that we literally could do this, you know, all night long. But I want to ask a final question, and they can say whatever they want. But my question would be, are there any measures or propositions that we should be paying attention to that maybe people are not? Some of them are obvious, like rent control is probably obvious, but there could be some others that we should be paying attention to that are not as obvious. And Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Okay. Are there anything out there that we should be paying attention to that kind of drops in your mind? And you can end it with any other comments that you want to make as well.
Well, I think the two that have been mentioned, rent control and affirmative actions, are important. I have a friend that's on dialysis, and I believe that, I forgot which number that is. I think that's 23. And because of what he's educated me about, I'm voting no on that, because it requires a medical doctor to be in the facility. And he says that as a result of that, that's going to increase the costs, and that's going to eliminate a lot of people to be able to afford that. And so I personally have a friend in that area, and so that's important to me. But let me just conclude with this. I know we're running out of time. I was recently going over the Montgomery bus boycott, and one of the things that struck me most about is that how many people were involved. You had individuals, when the buses were down, people who drove, people who cooked, Hilary Belafonte and his crew that provided money for those to bail out those who were in jail. You had all of these people on deck. And I believe that that's what this election is all about, that all told, everybody's got to be involved. And I believe that the harvest is plenty, and there's plenty of work to be done. This is one aspect of it, but even if it's just making sure your neighbor gets to the poll, we need everybody, all hands on deck. And I conclude with that.
Awesome, man, awesome. Now I can listen to you all night. That's powerful. Mr. Curry, I'm coming to you. One, I know I just happened to glance over, and I don't know if you've even looked at Prop 20, but it's the same question. Are there certain ones that we should be paying attention to? But someone asked a specific question about Prop 20. If you can clarify what that means.
Yes. Hey, Tia, I know who asked it. Hey, Tia, I'm going to answer that question. Prop 20 essentially, it restores the right to vote to felons upon. Well, let me just read it again, because I was actually just looking at it. It restores the right to vote to felons upon completion of their prison term. So right now, any felon, anybody who's convicted of a felony who's on parole cannot have their voting right restored during the time that they're on parole. Now, certain violent felonies, you never get your voting rights back. but right now, nobody who's on parole can vote. Or so what Prop 20 does is restores the right to vote immediately upon completion of your prison sentence. So while you're on parole and waiting to get off of parole, under Proposition 20, you have the ability to go to the poll and vote. And
I'm
that's what.
sorry, excuse me, Ludlow, that's Proposition 17.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Oh,
that's
yeah,
important, that's important, but
forgive me, that's 17. Okay.
I was thinking the same thing there.
Proposition 20 talks about the criminal sentencing, the charges and the release and DNA, the DNA collection, the big one about the DNA and the sentence.
Yeah, forgive me. I mixed the two up. So basically, you know, let's first just talk about sentencing. So essentially, about 6 years ago, Proposition 47 was passed, which designated certain crimes that were originally felonies as misdemeanors. So like, for instance, petty theft with a prior is now a misdemeanor, whereas before it was a straight felony. So, and then certain other theft crimes, the sentencing will be increased. So what Proposition 20 is attempting to do is restore certain crimes back up to a higher status with stronger penalties, restore what Proposition 47 took away. We don't need to increase incarceration. We are on a path to decreasing incarceration. So Proposition 20 really is a law that is from a previous era, and it really doesn't belong in the 21st century. So I would say vote no against Prop 20.
That's right.
It is supported by, of course, the police union, and they want to restore, harsh penalties on nonviolent crimes. Essentially, that's what it is. Now, in regards to DNA collection, let me just look at that really quickly, because that part I kind of glanced over. So essentially, right now, whenever you are charged with a felony, your DNA will be taken. That's the law. What they want to do now is add certain misdemeanors to that list of crimes that if you are charged with such a crime, that the state has a right to take your DNA and put it into a database, which they use to cross-match DNA found at crime scenes and things like that, and basically to keep track of people. So I don't think it's necessary. I think most, the misdemeanors they're talking about are low-level offenses. And, we've got to, I just sincerely believe we've got to stop branding people. We've got to gear ourselves toward allowing people that have made mistakes or who have been wrongly accused to re-enter society and get the benefits of full citizenship. So I don't think we need more DNA collection. So no on 20.
Okay. I want to, before I allow the judge to give her final comments, some of the questions have come up, and this is for Kevin or Ludlow, whoever wants to jump in, or both of you can jump in. It's in relation to Prop 25. And I've seen people I respect, politicians on different sides of this, on Prop 25, that says if passed, it will end cash bail and subject defendants to racial profiling by replacing it with races, classes, risk assessments, and algorithms to imprison defendants before trial. And I'm assuming that's the exact wording. I'm not sure if that's the exact wording of it. But in a nutshell, what's your perspective on Prop 25?
Well, for me, I'm personally voting no, because, and to make sure I'm saying this correctly, I don't think that money should be the issue of whether or not an individual gets out of jail. I don't, if they're awaiting trial. I think it should be primarily based upon public safety and a threat to not come back to court. But we know that affluent individuals can get out because they can post bail and they have the money to do so. And so I think that hampers one's ability to really prepare their trial and to fight the charges that are against them when they're in custody. And so I know that there's arguments on both sides, but for me, in my house, I would think that bail shouldn't be the detriment for somebody getting out simply because they do not have the money.
Awesome, thank you. Ludlow, any thoughts
Well,
on that?
Yeah. Greg, in theory, I agree with Kevin in theory. I just don't think this is the law. I think there needs to be some safeguards. My concern is, that, with institutional bias, that what we're going to have if this law is allowed to stand is, with bail is essentially everybody has the opportunity to make bail. Whether they can make it or not is another issue. With Proposition 25 as it stands, my concern is that judges are going to decide, with their, biases intact, that certain individuals are a threat to the community and certain individuals aren't, i.e., affluent individuals from prominent families are not a threat to the community, but people from, certain neighborhoods and of certain ethnic backgrounds are a threat to the community, and we have to protect the community from them. So if the judge decides this person's a threat to the community, and, I, as a defense lawyer, object to that, I have no recourse. Essentially, the judge has decided not to release this person, and they don't even have the option of raising money for bail. So if the judge decides they're not getting out, that's it, done deal. They're not getting out. So I think in theory that I agree with Kevin. The ability to pay shouldn't be the barometer for whether you get out of jail or not. But we need some safeguards so that you don't have a system that is tilted to certain groups due to institutional bias.
Awesome, and we certainly
So I say no. So to be clear, I say no on Prop 25.
Well, I appreciate both perspectives. I've heard different people on different sides of this issue. But now I want to give the judge any final comments that you want to make. We're not asking you about any propositions or any endorsements or any of that. I just want to give you the opportunity to make any final comments that you want to make. You're on mute.
I just want to bring it back to October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and just keep your eyes and ears open for the people in your sphere of influence who may be suffering silently. I always like to use the acronym from my book, Friends, find a way to bring up the subject. You could just say, hey, I spent Thursday night on a Zoom, talked about the propositions. And did you know October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month? How's it going with you? I mean, you could just pivot into the subject like that, but find a way to bring up the subject, refuse to sever ties with them, invite them to seek help, even if it's just personal counseling for themselves. Express your concern for their well-being. They haven't heard from you, you're looking run down. Is that another black eye? I mean, just be honest and candid. I'm concerned for your personal welfare. Don't judge them though, just be open and listen and then document everything. You keep your own notes every time they tell you about an episode or you witness an episode or an injury. You keep your own notes because the person who stays in an abusive relationship has to minimize it in their mind in order to stay in the relationship. But when they're ready to leave, Sometimes they can't recall because it's been repressed. And they might say, oh, it's just 5 times. And you whip out your notebook or your iPhone. You say, no, no, it's 25 times. And you just run down the list. And it's helpful when they're going to seek a restraining order to kick the person out of the house. And then lastly, help them set up a safety plan. They may know about you and maybe your brother or sister, but they don't know about your best friend. So you ask your best friend, hey, my good friend or my other best friend is in trouble. If she needs a place to stay for 2 or 3 nights, can she stay with you? If they'll ride by your house because they know about you, but they don't know about your friend.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Judge. That was very powerful, very important, because as we talked about on the onset, that we know that domestic violence has heightened because of the pandemic, not necessarily because of Domestic Violence Month, but because of the pandemic. And that's something that we have to be very, very conscious of. And sometimes, you know, you got to check in with folks. Hey, you all right? And ask them for real, are they all right? Well, I want to thank my panelists so much because my education has certainly increased. I was taking notes myself, and so certainly my education has been increased just by moderating, just by listening. So thank you, Mr. Kevin Anderson. Thank you, Judge Patricia Titus. Thank you, Mr. Ludlow Creary, for your time, for your investment tonight into this community and educating us. And like I said, we can do this all night. There's so much information, so many props. We didn't talk about healthcare and the Affordable Care Act. And I mean, I can go down a list of things we did not touch on. But I hope it at least inspired many of you to say, I'm going to educate myself.
Yes.
I'm going to dig. I'm going to find out. I'm going to hit Ludlow up on Facebook and say, hey, I got a question about this. I'm going to hit Kevin up and say, I'm going to hit Trina up, whoever. I got a question about this. And I think Judge said it earlier. Talk to other people who may be endorsing or who may know a little bit more than you know, and it's okay to ask questions. I'm confused about this one. Tonight, when I looked at Prop 25, I think both Kevin and Ludlow gave me 2 different perspectives. I got to sit down, I got to think about it now, because both of them gave me really intelligent perspectives that now I got to sit back and I got to think about it. And so I hope that inspired you to do the same thing tonight. And again, we didn't have enough time, but it was my honor. It was my pleasure to spend time with all of you tonight. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Miss Trina Lawson.
Thank you very much. I wish you could hear everybody clapping. Thank you. I'm going to clap for all of us because I see all the comments in here saying informative, great information. Thank you. And I knew we weren't going to have enough time. I said, there's no way, no matter what we do. So thanks from my heart to all of our panel and for Gregory Scott for moderating for us, because this is one of those things that you just can't get enough of. People have not hung up. We're watching the numbers. And so that means we did our job. We got the information out there. I promise you, we will put the links on the screen for you, but we're going to post them on trinalawsongroup.com. That drives you to my website anyway. So go to the website, stay informed, get your questions answered. I'm going to have Naomi Cox post some of the links right now. Miss Naomi, she works with Trina Lawson Group. There we go on the screen. Go ahead, Naomi.
Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we have. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm not going to block the screen. I'm just going to chat real quickly. We have 3 different slides. You can either take a screenshot of it. You can go to trinalawson.com to get more information than we have here. But these are real quick notes that we want to make sure you knew about before you vote. If you thought, well, I'm waiting for my ballot, didn't come yet and all that mess, you better check your registration. This is important because there's people's names because they moved and whatnot who have been purged from the voter rolls. So it happened to my son because he was in college. They had the wrong address. Whole thing. I had to get ignorant. So check your registration status. That is not optional. You need to do it, and you need to do it like tonight, right now. That is first thing. And here's some websites there you can look and check your status on. And then really importantly, a lot of people, it may kind of go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway because I heard something on NPR about how to fill out the ballot. Read it. You got to really read it because Some people don't use the right ink. Some people put a check mark. Some people put an X. You can't do that. You have to use blue or black ink. You got to fill it in completely like you did Scantron college-wise. You got to do it right. Something really important, you have to sign at least my ballot. Look at the outside envelope. You know how many ballots get turned down, don't get counted because they did not close it, put it inside, and sign the outside of the ballot envelope. I didn't know this for 20 years. Didn't want my signature on it. Now I know why. My stuff may have not been counted. Sign the ballot. Really important that you do that. Okay, the ballot envelope. And then for the propositions, I know we talked back and forth on a few of them, hit on them. We didn't go number by number. It is super important and something you can do if you're like a kind of like a cheater like me. CalMatters.org. Look at these websites. CalMatters, Ballotpedia, Voters Edge. CalMatters.org had these phenomenal 1-minute clips that you all have 1 minute to listen to each one of them of the propositions. If you vote yes, if you vote no, and then you need to dig deeper. Like all of our panelists were saying, you're like, I don't really get it. You need to do the homework and dig deeper. You still have time to do that, but CalMatters will at least get you over the hump. Ballotpedia goes through the propositions as well. Trina saw a phenomenal page there that can help you. Voters Edge really helped me when we were looking at, like Judge Titus said, I don't know who that judge is. I don't know who that person is. We never heard of half those people. Voters Edge has a whole bio on most of those people, at least to give you a like, oh no. So you know what to do with that. And ultimately, we also have your checklist just to make sure you go through and that you've checked your registration, find your polling place. Everybody should be getting a ballot in the mail. If you don't get it by a certain time, like right now, you need to start calling. You need to start checking. Find out where these ballot box locators are. And I know you heard the news. There's some crazy people out there who have put non-legal ballot boxes marked official. Do not drop your stuff in that box. Find through the SOS Secretary of State website, you can go and you can find exactly where a real ballot box is because they are specific. They're made a certain way. The legal ones are in certain locations. So you have to make sure you do that, fill it in, sign your ballot on the outside. Also, this is really important. Judge Titus brought this up as well. Please do this on your phone. You can get an email, a text on your phone or whatever. Go to where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov. You can track to make sure your ballot got counted. They will send you a text. So you know that you know that you know, because this is more important than the presidency. This is everything they've spoken about and more. These propositions affect you every day. And so you need to, at least these last 3 things, all this beautiful discussion could go on for forever, but at least these last 3, go to TrinaLawson.com and look for these to get all of these particular websites to go into and make sure that you follow those instructions all the way through. If I miss anything, trust me, one of these websites has it. But make sure you track your ballot, sign your ballot, fill it in, put it in the envelope. People sometimes mail it without the ballot, just saying. If it requires a privacy sleeve, put it in there. I don't know that ours don't, but some do. That is a big deal in some areas. But thank you guys so much. Trina, I'm handing it back to you.
Thank you, Naomi Cox. Again, we are giving ourselves a hand. Thank you to our team, Alicia, Tamara, and Naomi, so much for your help. And I want to say thank you again to all of our guests. You guys made tonight phenomenal.
Can I say one thing?
All right, Sarah, thank you for this tonight as well. Sarah, thank you. I want to get right to this.
Open it up just to say goodbye. We want to say goodnight.
I just want to make one correction. Can I make one correction?
Correction, go ahead. Okay.
I just wanted to say that I want to correct what I said about Prop 17. The current law in California.
Okay, I think you're muted. Just unmute yourself. She had to mute everyone so we can hear you. Unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, the current law in California is that all felons, once they complete their parole, get their voting rights restored. The new law under Prop 17 will allow you to get your voting rights restored before you complete parole. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. Okay, without anything else, I am always sad to say goodbye, but I see friends and family here, colleagues, supporters. And again, we thank you. Miss Alicia, I know you wanted to open up so they can make a noisy goodbye. We do a noisy goodbye because we love you. We appreciate your support. This is about unity. We came together as a community. We learned knowledge is power. Knowledge is important. So thank you for taking time out for yourself, because we have to level up. We have to keep leveling up, and you can only do that by getting everything you need, right?
Right.
So,
All right.
Hey, Judge Patty. Thank you to all the
Love it.
speakers.
My noisy goodbye. Say goodbye to whoever.
Thank you to our
Hi,
speakers.
Teresa.
for District
Bye.
C7.